Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday evening as we welcome John Anderson for his presentation and launch of his new book, Sherlock Holmes and Little London, 1896, The Missing Year. My name is Brian, and along with Shannon, who is running the Zoom controls, the Pikes Peak Library District is happy to bring you this event. Tonight's presentation will last about 1 hour. John will speak for a while, followed by some time to answer questions you may have. So at any time during or after John's talk, if you have a question for him, please use the chat feature in your Zoom program. It might appear along the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. Since we have many attendees tonight, we will do our best to get to many of them, but please forgive us if we do not due to time constraints. Surely one of the most recognizable names in the history of mystery and detective literature is that of Sherlock Holmes and his sidekick, Dr. Watson. Of course, they first appeared in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's 1887 novel, A Study in Scarlet. And the following 3 novels and 56 short stories quickly took their place as pillars in the genre of crime fiction. Over the next 130 plus years, the characters live on in works of literature, TV shows, radio productions, movies, conventions, popular culture, but also in the real life world of forensic sciences. In 1991, John Anderson submitted a paper to the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts titled Sherlockian Theories, Lessons from the Greatest Detective Who Never Lived. This paper was presented and published in the 1991 joint conference in Montreal, Canada, with the Canadian Society of Forensic Science and the Society of Forensic Toxicologists. In it, John suggested these Sherlockian theories may actually lay the foundation upon which any professional, quality, criminal, scientific investigation should be built. His paper describes how the application of these can aid investigative processes and help minimize mistakes, particularly in the realm of bloodstain pattern analysis. But forward 30 years to now, and with the eye of an investigator and a criminalist, John brings you into the world of the characters that Sir Conan Arthur Doyle created, that of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson in his new book, Sherlock Holmes and Little London, 1896, The Missing Year. Holmes fans the world over have long wondered what to make of 1896, this missing year. The year has remained a mystery. Where on earth did Sherlock Holmes and his friend Dr. Watson go? Finally, now we know. During a chance discovery in the spring of 2020, a black pocket notebook belonging to Dr. Watson was discovered. The notebook contained Dr. Watson's personal notes detailing an unpublished investigation of an international counterfeiting ring, which drew Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson away from their warm flat at 221B Baker Street, London, England, to across the pond, here to Colorado Springs, to Glen Eyrie Castle, a small town in the American West, once known as Little London. Our speaker tonight, John Wesley Anderson, is a published author, storyteller, and TEDx speaker. Growing up on a small Colorado ranch, John spent endless hours riding horses, collecting coins, and reading. One of the first books he remembers reading was The Adventures of Silver Blaze by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. After graduating high school in 1972, John joined the Colorado Springs Police Department for a 22-year career. He also served 6 years as a homicide detective and taught criminal investigation courses at the Police Academy. To teach investigative fundamentals, John used quotes from the canon of Sherlock Holmes written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In 1995, John was elected to serve as sheriff for El Paso County, Colorado. And after being term limited out in 2003, he retired from a 30-year law enforcement career and was employed by Lockheed Martin. In 2012, John retired from the corporate world to launch a private consulting business, which also allowed him the freedom to pursue his love of writing, history, and the arts. This is his 6th published book, and we are honored to have him with us tonight as he launches his newest book. John Anderson, welcome.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that warm welcome, and to Shannon for being our Zoom master tonight and making sure that this runs okay. And for all of you for joining us tonight from all over the country. I recognized, and I was trying to keep up with some of the chat box, but if I focus on one thing, I might be able to do that okay. And I want to make sure this goes well. So I apologize for not welcoming everybody on the Zoom and the chat when you were coming in, but I'm thrilled to have so many of my friends here tonight, and in particular, Gavin and his family across the street, and Ginger across town, Kent Wyatt, who we've talked about Sherlock Holmes forever, for 30 years probably, friends Scott and Roxanne in Florida, and Brandon from the UAE. So that's one wonderful thing about Zoom is, in doing a book launch like this, is we'll have people here that I've never been able to enjoy this evening. So thank you all for being here. And I'm really excited about this book, as you can probably tell. But I'm also excited about sharing some of the processes about how this book was written, how it came about. And that's what I think many of you will enjoy, is whether or not you're Sherlock Holmes fans like Kent and I, or you haven't read one before like some of you. What I'm hoping is this will incite in you an interest in maybe writing your own novel, or reading Sherlock Holmes or some of the other books that we'll talk about. I know I've had the dream to write my own book for at least 30 years, and I've talked to people about that. And when I retired in 2012 to allow me, as Brian mentioned in the intro, the time to focus on a third career, being an author, I so appreciated being able to sit and talk to other authors and people who've published books. And one of the first lessons I learned was that writing a book is a team sport. And boy, that is certainly the case with all of my books. And I can't acknowledge everybody publicly tonight just because of time limitations. We only have an hour. There's so many. So I tried to put the acknowledgments in the back of the book. And tonight is really kind of a celebration for me. And I have several writer friends who I talk to about, well, what do you do when you finish a book? How do you celebrate that? And I remember one friend of mine who said, well, every time I finish writing a book, he said, I'll celebrate by having smoking a good quality cigar. Well, I don't smoke, so that was kind of out. Another friend says, well, my wife and I, we always go to a fancy restaurant and get a nice bottle of wine, enjoy a dinner. But what I really have enjoyed doing is sharing that celebration with all of my friends and family, getting as many people together as we can. I know several of you that I saw signing in tonight have been at some of my book launches before. My first 4 books were launched at the Old Colorado City Historical Society, and some of you have been at all 4 of those events, and it is exciting to be able to share that with everybody. But it's kind of fun actually doing it this way, virtually, again, because it's a broader audience and people who wouldn't be able to do that, to be here to attend. I think it gives us a little better control over some of the audio acoustics, some of the your slides and those things. But probably the most beneficial thing is that it's being recorded. So it saves that. So if somebody, a friend or whoever, wasn't able to attend, and you think that this is something they might enjoy, you can share that link, or I'll be able to put on my website, and the library will be able to put on their website too. So we have 84 people who signed in tonight as registrants, but I think many people like Scott and Roxanne, there's a couple, or Dave and Joanne next door. There's 2 people there, so I think we're well over 100 people to be here tonight, which is larger than any of the book launches I've done in the past. This is my 6th book, and I really have to pause just for a moment and brag on the person who really brought this book to what it is today. That's Don Kalass with Rhyolite Press. And Don deserves, I hope you're listening here tonight, Don, but Don deserves great credit, not only for the book production and the layout and making it happen, but for so many personal touches that you don't realize until you actually hold the book and hold it in your hand. And that was one of the greatest pleasures I had when Don handed me the proof copy of my book, and with a smile on his face, and I shared that pride. A couple of things that really are key with the book cover. The title, Sherlock Holmes in Little London, 1896, The Missing Year. Well, those of you that have been in Colorado Springs a while may recognize the title, Little London, because that's what Colorado Springs was known for during the Victorian era. And when General Palmer built Glen Eyrie Castle behind me, that was during that Victorian era. He was, of course, the founder of Colorado Springs. And out of all of the 60 short stories, 56 short stories, the 4 novels that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published on Sherlock Holmes and his intrepid friend, Dr. Watson, there was always this mystery about 1896, the missing year. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a prolific writer, and he published, 30 or 40 books up to the end of 1895. And then there's a gap in the series, and that gap doesn't get filled until November 1896 and December, and then January 1897. So there's always been this mystery, this mystique about where was Sherlock Holmes in 1896, the missing year. And my storyline goes is that they were here in Little London, Colorado Springs, as guests of General Palmer, staying at Glen Eyrie Castle. In the pocket notebook that Dr. Watson kept all of the notes on, all the investigative notes of this case, was hidden in a vault by Dr. Watson in the bedroom suite that he was staying in, above the fireplace mantle in a secret vault. And so this black notebook has been in that vault for 125 years until April of 2020, when a carpenter was doing some repairs or remodel in that bedroom and found the secret vault and found the notebook. And now for the first time, we now know where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were in 1896. They were here in Little London. The first place they go, the first scene when they arrive in Little London and get off the train, is the Antlers Hotel. And this is where I got to brag on Don just a little bit. If you notice in the background on the book cover is this clock tower. What you may not recognize, unless you've been in Colorado Springs a while and are a fan of old photos like I am, is this is the south tower of the original Antlers Hotel. So it would have been the part of the hotel at the Antlers when Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes went in. And the little touches that Don did throughout the book, making sure that the typeface, for example, was what was in existence in the late 19th century. The look and the feel and the colors. Don, you just did a wonderful job with this. You hit it out of the park. Thank you for doing such an outstanding job on the book cover. I can't take any credit for the book cover. The book is one that I'm so proud of in the story and the way that this came out. But I'm supposed to be. I'm the author of it. I think it's a great book, but I guess that's really up to you and the readers and for the future to decide. What I did do, though, is I spent a lot of time researching, well, what does make a book great? And what are examples of great books? And there's so many in literature. I think what I've come up with is that there's 3 really critical features of a great book, and that is that they have to have a fascinating story. They have to have intriguing settings, and they have to have unforgettable characters. Well, that's what Sherlock Holmes, the canon of Sherlock Holmes, has. Unforgettable characters who seem as alive today as they did 125 years ago. And the intriguing settings, there's no setting probably more mysterious and iconic than what we're looking at right here, 221 B Baker Street in London, which was the address for Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And so the story starts with chapter 1 in that setting, in their home. And so what I think you'll find is this fascinating study or story that weaves in the intricate settings and the characters that have been there for over a century and bringing them back to life and introducing a few new characters. Another great characteristic I feel of a great book is that it has to have broad appeal. It has to appeal to diverse audiences, different genders, ages, ethnic backgrounds, cultures, but also must be timeless. And when we look at some of the great pieces of literature, and not that I'm comparing my work to any of those, that'll be up to 100 years from now, and I'm sure we'll fall way short. But what I did do deliberately was to go back over some great literature and again try to compare those characteristics that make one book stand out after another. And those are some of the things that I want to share with you, particularly if you are like me and have had that dream of writing your own book. And I can't tell you how many people that since I've published a few books have said, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, or I've got an idea for a book, but I just don't know where to get started. And I can relate to that. 10 years ago, that's certainly where I was. And there's 2 tools I'll be sharing with you tonight that I hope get you on your launch to a great book. When we look back on literature like Moby Dick and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and of course the canon of Sherlock Holmes, that 56 short stories and the 4 novels, it really brings the characters alive, and they share this epic adventure together, and you as a reader get to share that adventure with them. Another thing that I've tried to do is in talking to other published authors like my friend Bill Scott, and he'll share not only techniques but also who he's also studied or read about in writing great books. And one of those was John Franklin. And one tip that Bill passed on to me that I'll share here is that a master storyteller does not just tell a story, he shows the story to the readers. And that's what I've also tried to do, is to bring it to life and to invoke the 5 senses. So there's purposely throughout not only the words, but the inclusion of thoughts and smells and visual effects. And I think that was really a good tip. And John Franklin talks about showing complications, action, and resolve. How do your characters work through the complications, the action, and the resolve? Bill shares this acronym that I won't forget, CAR, and it's by showing those complications, what your character does to reach that resolve, and then it starts all over again. I also want to share this PowerPoint presentation here, and this is what I put together as kind of my storyboard. Many of you are familiar with storyboards, and there's different ways of creating the storyboard, and I think I've tried them all. I've tried, whiteboard, and doing a mind map, and I've tried putting my notes on 3x5 cards, and then you can move those around, and sticky notes that you put on the wall. And by all means, if you already got something that really works well for you, some people, outstanding authors, if they're really talented enough, like John Grisham and David Baldacci, what they use is an outline just on a legal notepad. They're attorneys, and it's easier for them to do this. So they'll start an outline, and they'll just keep expanding, and they can move things around. But what I want to introduce you to is what I call an e-storyboard using PowerPoint, and it allows the story to unfold. It allows you to help create your story arc through the different chapters, to control kind of your page count, where you're at. It allows you to gather information and sort information, to move it around where it fits better. And it's really worked well for me. Three attributes that I picked up on in trying to accomplish a book project is the better able you're, for me, to visualize the project, verbalize the project. It'll help you actualize the project. So verbalize, visualize, verbalize, and then actualize. So those three things are really helpful with a PowerPoint, with an e-storyboard. So that's what we're going to look at here as we go through the making, the writing of Sherlock Holmes in Little London, 1896, the missing year. I also wanted to make sure that I stayed true to the voice of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And for those of you that have read some of my earlier books, one of the compliments I had was a reader who's read, I think, probably all my books, said, well, this doesn't even sound like you. It sounds completely different. And that was the goal. The intent was to try to sound like Dr. Watson would have spoken or written, which was the way that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the actual book. So I was trying to emulate the voice, the cadence, the terminology that was used 125 years ago, particularly with these characters, with Dr. Watson in particular. And to help do that, I went back and read several of the 56 short stories and again, so that they were fresh in my mind, particularly up to 1895, and the ones right before this missing year. But I also went back and watched several of the movies. People my generation probably remember Jeremy Brett. He was kind of the epitome of Sherlock Holmes. But, you know, I really have to give credit to Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, because in watching those two movies that they did more recently, many times, I really think they have stayed true to the voice of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, at the same time kind of bringing in their own traits. And what really works well in both of those films, it was what I think worked so well in the canon of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was this chemistry, this interaction, the interplay between these two fascinating characters, the subtle witticisms that come out along their adventures. So I really tried to emulate that style and wanting to stay true. And from the early 5-star reviews, the early reviews, I think that's how I judge if I think I'm getting close. And a couple of the 5-star reviews that have come in on Amazon were engaging and entertaining, little known historical facts. And that's what I wanted to put in, because when I read a book, that's what I really enjoy, is a little known historical fact or a geographic place that I've not been to, or that I have been to that I can relate to, or that I want to go to. So I'm so thankful for the 5-star reviews. One of my reviews said, an Amazon customer said, could not put this book down, captivating plot and immensely engaging. And that's what I wanted to make sure it was engaging immediately the reader, and that when you got to one chapter, you'd want to flip the page to the next chapter. And one of my other friends said, he kind of laughs, says, well, my wife was up till 3 o'clock in the morning reading your book. And this other reviewer said, I felt like I was right there traveling with him and Dr. Watson, and this book is a keeper. So I'm really proud to start getting those reviews in to know that I've hit the mark. So please share those reviews with me. The other tool that I want to share with you, in addition to the e-storyboard, is the Hero with 1,000 Faces, sometimes referred to as stages of a hero's journey. And I have to thank my friend Brandon for this. And Brandon, I can remember our conversation 10 years ago when you first brought up if I'd ever asked me if I'd ever heard of the hero's journey, and I'd never had. And yet I'd read so many books that had those stages of the hero's journey there. What's really important is that if you're interested, there's a lot of information on Wikipedia, or you can Google Hero 1,000 Faces and Stages of the Hero's Journey. There's great diagrams that you can download from Bing and Pinterest and other places. But one of the most important things to remember of this journey that's so compelling and important to keep in mind is that this couple things. One is that the stages of the hero's journey falls naturally into the 3-act structure which is perfect for a screenplay. And what author does not want his or her books turned into a screenplay? And I've had the privilege of writing and co-authoring 2 screenplays now, and I hope this one becomes a screenplay too. So it's written and set up for that 3-act structure. And the 3 acts, the hero's journey, is kind of broken down into these 3 steps, which go from separation to initiation and return. And you always start in the ordinary world, and then you get a call to adventure, and we'll talk about those. And in fact, I'll just flip to the next slide now. So chapter 1 is the ordinary world. The next chapter is this call to adventure, and then usually there's a refusal of the call to adventure. In this case, I skipped that because the call for adventure comes from the Queen of England, Queen Victoria, directly to Sherlock Holmes. And who can turn the Queen of England down? So Sherlock Holmes, of course, accepts the call to adventure. He has to. He can't turn that down. And what I'm using with the PowerPoint slide, as you can see, is a visual reference that sets up that paragraph or that chapter. Now, I've not had the privilege of being to London, but that's a wonderful thing about where we live now, and access to information, the internet, Google. In using PowerPoint, you can download clip art, you can put in maps and bring photos in and arrange that. So when you get to these different chapters, if you're a visual person like me, I want to see that setting. And so this is the Tower Bridge in London. Again, I've never been there, but on Wikipedia, you can read great details about how it was built and constructed. Make sure that you're staying true that it was actually existing during your period. And the tower, South Tower, right here at the top, is where the meeting is, this clandestine meeting with the Queen of England in 1896, which launches this journey, this adventure. So well, once you get kind of that anchor for that image that precedes that chapter, then what you can do down below, or in whatever format you're using on whatever your PowerPoint slide, but you can start building in the little details with icons. And the visualization helps me so much more than just a long list of data or text or information or an outline. So if I can see these pictures, what it does is it reminds me that, Queen Victoria is in this chapter. I can go online with Wikipedia. I can get great details about her how old she would have been in 1896. She was a dainty woman, so I can get a physical description, weave that into the storyline. This story is about coins, counterfeit coins. So I can find the coin that I want and the image. I can kind of set up how that chapter is going to be structured, but I can also move things around. I can shift it if I need to. So when I get to my next chapter, if I'm having a conversation and I haven't introduced that character, I might need to go back and introduce that character if I'm going to talk to him. Now, in the hero's journey, one of the sequences, the stages early on, is everybody has to have helpers, and that's what's so wonderful about Sherlock Holmes is he comes with his helper, Dr. Watson, who's there all along. We'll have some other helpers in there too. I want to mention too that this hero's journey, it is something, a formula for writing great books in literature that dates back all the way to the Iliad and the Odyssey in the 8th century BC. But it's also been used to set up some of not only the best books written more recent in modern times, but also some great music, but also some outstanding movies, blockbuster movies, to include Star Wars. Star Wars uses this formula, the hero's journey. Avatar uses this formula, the hero's journey. The Harry Potter series, it uses the hero's journey. So we're seeing unforgettable characters, fascinating settings, and an intriguing plot that all are intertwined around the stages of the hero's journey that goes back in literature 10,000 years and will probably be in existence for 10,000 years from now. So all we're doing is just using a proven formula and making our own variants to it. Joseph Campbell's monomyth uses 17 stages. I'm only using 12. one for each chapter. So at the bottom, as I'm going through that chapter, writing that chapter, I know I need a luxury liner. You know, I'm going to need some maps to know, you know, where we're going. But there's different plot lines that are interwoven here too. So I know that Irene Adler, for Kent and the rest of my Sherlock Holmes fans, Irene Adler, one of the world's premier opera singers, she makes an appearance here throughout the story. And I needed a steamship, so I'm using the RMS Republic, which was a White Star Line. So I'll be, I can actually go back and find out how big that ship was, how many passengers, you know, what are the unique things about that ship. So as we're going through each of the chapters, chapter 4, the hero's journey always has your hero going out where they cross the threshold. There's no turning back. Jason the Argonauts, perfect example. He's going to have helpers. Most of your heroes or heroines do. They're going to have a sorcerer or an oracle or someone. It might be just a relative or a spirit helper. Someone's helping them along, and they depend on that helper more and more as the story evolves and it advances, especially as you close in on your narrative arc, when you hit that ordeal is what they call it here. So we'll be crossing the threshold, and I wanted to, you know, find places, people, characters that would have been interesting. You know, if you were traveling then and you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you want to sit down and have dinner with? And what would that conversation be like? So in the story, we sit down and have dinner at Delmonico's with Mark Twain. And so the conversation is between Mark Twain and Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And one of the things that Mark Twain was well known for is his support of fingerprint identification, which a lot of people don't know. So we're introducing the forensic sciences that Sherlock Holmes was known for. Along the way, we'll talk about his use of disguises, his deductive reasoning, his observation, that his skills of seeing things that ordinary people, and even Dr. Watson, who's right there with him, don't see. So this is down at the bottom, the ribbon here is setting up the storyline. So when they arrive here in Colorado Springs, Little London, they're guests of General Palmer. And along the line, they're going to have tests. This is part of the hero's journey. Their courage is always tested, or their intellect. There's always going to be other allies, and there's going to be enemies. So there are a couple of assassination attempts on Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson as we go through and weaving in different things of opera and things that are interesting and fun to read about, but it helps your characters expand. One of the stages in the hero's journey that's really fascinating is the approach to the innermost cave. And so that's usually some inner reflection. It's what am I most fearful of? That, you know, it could be chemical addiction. Sherlock Holmes, as many of you know, was addicted to cocaine. He had problems with, especially in times between cases when he was just not actively engaged in a case, with drinking too much. But he always had got this adrenaline rush from challenging a worthy opponent, especially a boxer, a bare knuckle boxer. So I had to work that in. So he meets Jack Dempsey, and that becomes part of the story. And as Sherlock Holmes and another character and Dr. Watson are in the innermost cave, this setting is in Cripple Creek. And so they're in a gold mine, hundreds of feet underground, and a bomb goes off intentionally to close and seal the entrance, trying to kill Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes and the other person that's in the cave. So I'm using kind of the monolith, the approach to the innermost cave. As the story actually unfolds, there's going to be other helpers, and in this case, when Dr. Watson comes out of the cave, he makes his way to Manitou Springs, to the Briarhurst Manor, and his helper is Dr. William Bell, who was one of the founders of Manitou Springs and Colorado Springs. And so there's a series of moves, just like a chess piece. And that's where the PowerPoint e-storyboard is so helpful, because you may realize, wait a minute, I have to introduce something in this that I'm going to expand on in this chapter much earlier, or I need to move something back, or I need to come back to that. In this case, when we get to chapter 8, now we're starting to come to that story arc, and there's an ordeal. And in this case, we're following in 1896. One of the wonderful things that's built in with this story is there were two huge fires in Cripple Creek, 4 days apart, and they were absolutely an arson, no doubt. So we've got major crime. There's some people who die in the second arson. It ends up burning down half the town of Cripple Creek, which also is part of the MO, the modus operandi of this counterfeit ring, that international ring of counterfeiters that Sherlock Holmes is set out with Dr. Watson to try to capture. It also happens to be the year that Colorado Springs Police Department loses its first police officer killed in the line of duty. So what I'm bringing back in is real events that happened during that time. So this is really kind of it's a mystery, but it's also historical fiction, and the things that I think should be remembered during that time and in the setting, like the death of Officer Benjamin Franklin Bish. Without exception, well, I just shouldn't say without exception, almost always in the storyline, the hero's journey, you're going to see a chase scene, a flight, and you either have, the bad guys like Professor Moriarty here, pursuing Sherlock. In this case, it's actually one of Professor Moriarty's henchmen who's chasing Irene Adler, and Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are chasing these bad guys. So we have this chase scene that takes them from Little London and Colorado Springs all the way to San Francisco and then up into the Yukon. And what happens is we get to tour literally the world in 1896 through these two characters, from leaving London and coming to New York City, then Little London, Colorado Springs, San Francisco, the Yukon, and they'll end up making their way back to England here. So I needed a sailing ship, so it's easy to search ships with the Sherlock Holmes novels. Gloria Scott was a very famous ship that has an active role. So this is the Gloria Scott II, which is an old whaling ship, and this is where we have Dr. Watson lamenting that he no longer has his pocket notebook. He left it accidentally behind. He hasn't been able to get to it. And where is that notebook? And when will he get it? How can he explain this case? So they're chasing the bad guys to the Yukon, and that's where kind of the climax of the book is, the narrative arc, the peak. And then chapter 11. Now, once you hit that arc, you kind of need to finish out the book rather quickly. So chapter 11 is shorter, and the shortest chapter is 12. So after the arc, we're sliding down and returning home with the elixir. The elixir can be anything. It can be, a weapon. It could be Excalibur. It could be an amulet or something. It could just be wisdom. It could be a skill. It could be something else that they've acquired during that journey. So this is finishing out the story. In the last chapter, you always have at home. So they're now back home. They're better off than they were. They've had this adventure, and they're going to receive their rewards, the boons. What is it that is going to be bestowed upon them? I don't want to tell you that. You might pick up a little bit from the little icons down at the bottom. The story ends on Christmas Eve, and they're exchanging Christmas presents. So that's how the story will end. If you're interested in reading a couple of the Sherlock Holmes stories, you might want to start with the Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb, which plays a major part. The characters, that's the only case only two cases that Sherlock Holmes wasn't ever able to solve. And he reminds Dr. Watson that wasn't able to solve it yet. So by the time that they get back home, they solve that case. One of the things I should point out, if you are interested in writing this, is there are some issues with public domain. Which of the books are in the public domain? So I had to spend quite a bit of time researching that, not only to protect me, but to protect my publisher. And out of the 56 short stories in the 4 novels, the first 50 short stories that include the 4 novels, those have all been declared adjudicated in court of law, that says that they are declared now in the public domain. But the last 10 are not. They will not get released to the public domain until 2022. I think some come out and then 2023. After that, they'll all 60 be out. So you have to be a little guarded if you're doing something like this and using an existing character, that making sure you're not violating any proprietary information. So I had to make sure that the Adventures of the Engineer's Thumb, which was published in March 1892 in the Strand magazine, that had already been cleared. We're in good shape there. So I just want to kind of end with, I always get this at book talks and book signings. I said, "Look, this is great. Can I get this book in my local library?" Yes, you can. Pikes Peak Library District has ordered this book. They have it. It's been cataloged. It'll be on the shelves whenever they're ready. And I have really got to commend the Pikes Peak Library District. And I think a lot of our libraries have really been over backwards during this time of COVID with, curbside service and delivery and setting the books out and really trying to work through a really challenging time in the library industry. But if you're interested and you live in the Colorado Springs area, I delivered 20 books, author signed first editions to Hooked on Books downtown. And then they also have an east branch off of Academy and Maysland. So if you want your own copy, there's an autographed copy there. Or if you want to log on to Amazon, we're probably all doing Amazon now, more than we did. But if you log on to Amazon and just put in my full names, the easiest thing to do, John Wesley Anderson, this book will pop up, as well as books 3, 4, 5, and 3, 4, and 5. So the ones with the asterisk are already on Amazon. My first 2 books, thanks to Don and Colossian Rhyolite Press, we're going through the process now of getting Ute Indian Prayer Trees, which was a really good seller, to where it will be available, distributed through Ingram and on Amazon, and probably by the end of the third quarter or first quarter of 2021, Rankin Scott Kelly be on there too. But I also want to mention this one. This book is now in Don's hands. It's A to Z, Colorado's Nearly Forgotten History, 1776 to 1876. In each chapter, A to Z, 26 short stories about Colorado history that's nearly forgotten, that takes place during that time frame, from when we become the United States to the time that Colorado becomes a state in the United States. So hopefully we'll be able to do a book launch in about 3 months. Maybe we'll do, it depends on if this COVID is behind us, maybe we'll do an actual virtual launch and a physical launch. We'll see where we're at in about 3 months. What I'd like to do as I wrap this up is, Shannon, if we can, let's, I should have introduced and thanked Shannon Miller. She's our Zoom master tonight. She's the master behind the curtains that's running everything. So I want to stop sharing my screen, and we'll bring Brian up next to me. And if you have any questions or comments, you can type those in the chat box. But I want to close out my part of the presentation with making a couple observations here. One is, I believe never before in history is there a better time to write a book than right now. With COVID requirements, we're all, you only watch so much TV or, video games. This is the perfect time with COVID to write that book. Now you might say, well, I can't get out and do a lot of the research, John, that you were doing, but we do have resources with a global network to search and find information, emails, access to information, resources that didn't exist when Mark Twain was writing his great works, or Shakespeare. And when you think back, some of these great authors were writing with a pen and quill, and some were using a manual typewriter. Just think what they could have done, if they had a computer and a laptop and an iPad, those kinds of things. Also, I'll pass on a tip that came to me, that really make time to read, and read what you like to write what you like to read, and create kind of a disciplined process with yourself. That's what the great authors today, like John Grisham and Stephen Kuntz and David Baldacci, almost all of them start early in the morning, uninterrupted. A lot of them will start at 4 in the morning. They'll get up early just to start writing. And I try to write every single day. Try building a PowerPoint between now and New Year's. Put together a draft storyboard. Look at the hero's journeys. Figure how you can weave that in. And I just hope you enjoy reading Sherlock Holmes in Little London, the Missing Year, half as much as I enjoy writing it. I think I probably read this 12 or 15 times during the writing and the editing process. And it's one of the books, again, I'm biased since I wrote it, but I really enjoy going back and the feeling that it makes it. So I want to just end by thanking all of you and Brian and Shannon again for being here. And I just want to wish all of you happy holidays and to you and yours, but to everyone, a healthy new year. Thank you for being here. Brian, let me turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, John, for that wonderful talk. And as a matter of fact, I am reading your book, and the page 126 is where I made it to last night. You talk about finding Sherlock Holmes to be totally absorbed in an advertisement about a local bare knuckles boxing champion named Dempsey, a mucker at the Portland mine who was fighting Saturday night under the boxing name of Kid Blackie. And I think anybody out there who has an appreciation for Colorado Springs, for its history, is new to the area, is a fan of detective fiction, will certainly enjoy this book, the blending of characters and place. So thank you very much, John. We have a couple of questions here in the chat box for you, and any of our attendees that would like to ask John a question, please go to your chat box and deposit the question there. First question we have is from, let me go to the top of the list here. Thanks, John. Robin asks, what is, and this would be about you, what is your favorite place in Colorado Springs?
What a great question. And there's so many. I think one of them is right here, Glen Eyrie Castle. And if you've not had a chance to do that, it's probably limited with COVID right now, but I love Glen Eyrie Castle. And for those of you that have heard me talk about our first sheriff, Rankin Scott Kelly, you'll know that he owned the land that he sold to General Palmer to build Glen Eyrie Castle. He sold in the land for $1,000 cash, if you can imagine, back in the 1860s, early 1870s. So I think if I could go back to any one place and have one conversation with dinner or tea or whatever, it would be here at Glen Eyrie Castle. And I'd love to go back and be sitting there at the table when Sheriff Kelly is selling General Palmer the deed to his land. That would be one of my favorite places and times to be at.
Doris asks, why a Holmes story now? Personally, she loves the characters and most of their iterations. So what inspired you to write your story now?
Well, part of it is just timing, Doris. And as Kent knows, I probably talked to him about, the missing year and wanting to write this story back in the 80s. But you know what? It would have been much harder then, because the Sherlock Holmes story and characters stories had not been released to the public domain or public domain. So there would have been some licensing issues and things that probably would have been a showstopper for me. So I think the best time to have this book written for me was right now. And it also, for me, it has to be when I have chunks of time. I tried to write my Sheriff Kelly book when I was the sheriff of El Paso County, and those 8 years just flew by, and you're busy chasing outlaws in the Texas 7 or whoever comes into town, so you don't have time to do that. And I need to really be focused, to go back to that time, or in my sci-fi novel, to go into the future. So the timing has to be right for you personally, but I really think Sherlock Holmes is timeless. And when we see the wonderful appeal that these two movies with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, those were such great movies. We need a third one of those to come out. And I think bringing them here and having them film it at Glen Eyrie and Cripple Creek, that'd be the best place to film it.
And we need a cameo appearance from John Wesley Anderson as well. What character, we'll leave it up to you. So our next question comes from Ginger, who asks, John, where did you get the idea for using gold counterfeit coins?
Well, Great question, Ginger. And I've always loved coin collecting since I was a little boy. So I was always fascinated with that. And when I read The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb, and the bad guys were counterfeiting coins, it just seemed like such a natural fit. And since that was one case that Sherlock hadn't solved yet, then it seemed to be a perfect setting. And the other thing that I tied in here with this mystery is this idea of alchemy, that you could turn baser metals into gold using electricity or vice versa. So the gold that the coins, there's an allegation that they were never stolen from the mint, that maybe they were just turned into brass and it was used alchemy in reverse order. So I think that's an interesting subplot. You got to have your red herrings, you got to have your backstories, and so I thought it was just such a perfect place. But I think that's one of the most beautiful coins ever struck, that 1893 Jubilee with Victorian head. And not that I own one, I'd love to have one, but it's a great coin. And I think it tied into the story very nicely. So thanks for the question.
Our next question and comment comes from Heidi. She says, "You certainly are passionate about your books. Thank you for thank you for talking about the hero's journey process. Was it difficult to accomplish capturing the voice in the Sherlock Holmes series? You did this so well."
Well, thank you. And I spent a lot of time kind of working on that and reading how did Sir Arthur Conan Doyle phrase something? What's different than today? A good example is in English literature, especially in America, we say, "I said this." And in the book, you'll see it says, "said I." And that's the way a lot of the writers wrote during the 19th century. And so I tried to discipline myself to do that every time, unless it sounded really awkward, and then I'd put it back the other way. So I think what helped was visualizing the characters of Jude Law when he was talking to Sherlock Holmes, and Robert Downey Jr. when he was doing something or saying something. And I think that cadence was in my mind from the movies and the books that had been written. And I think it was a mental transition to try not to go how I would speak, but how I thought that they would speak or how they'd answer questions. Oh, and I should mention this. I did find, by searching the internet, some small newsreels, some little clippets, like with Mark Twain. There was a wonderful little interview. It was only like 4.5 or 5 minutes, and it was grainy and it's all black and white, and the lighting wasn't good. But it was Mark Twain, and it was his voice, and he was speaking, and it was really fascinating to hear how he spoke, and you're getting the sense of how he sounds in your mind. But I'm also reading great quotes from Mark Twain, and I put many of those quotes and quotes from Sherlock Holmes in the manuscript deliberately, rather than how I thought they would say something. I took a direct quote from them, and that helped too. So thanks for the question.
Russ asks, "Do you know, are any of your books available in any Denver area bookstores?"
Not yet, but I'd love to. And in fact, I was talking to a friend today about the tattered cover, and how they have 6 locations to include one on Cherry Creek near the mall. In my A to Z books, A is for Anza, B is for Buffalo Soldiers, but C is for Cherry Creek. And so when that book comes out, I hope to be doing a lot of advertising and promoting there. It's really a challenge. I love the writing. It wasn't my idea to be a bookseller, but if I'm really proud of my books, which I am, and I'm proud of the stories, you want them to do well. So I think part of your responsibility to the author is to also be the ambassador for your books. And you won't believe this, but I'm a bit of a closet introvert, and it's hard to talk about myself, but I am passionate about a mission or a cause. And in this case, I'm very passionate about this book. I think it's a wonderful book, and I'm so proud of it. I'm proud of the teamwork that went into it. I'm proud of what Don Kloss did in designing the book. And And it's really an enjoyable, entertaining read, and it's an easy read. And so I think it will long outlive me and Dawn. It'll be around for hopefully for 125 years.
Next question comes from Karen. She asks, do you have a bibliography in this novel? It sounds very historical.
You know, that's a good question, Karen. I do mention certain books by title, especially during some of the conversations. Like I remember one conversation that Mark Twain is having with Dr. Watson and Holmes, of course, is there, about his characters, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And the question is it better, more ethical for Mark Twain to disclose when he's asked by a fan, you know, well, how are, you know, Huck Finn and, you know, and Tom Sawyer doing? And so the question from Mark Twain to Watson and Holmes is it more ethical for me to tell these people that these are two characters that don't actually exist? They're just figments of my imagination. And one of the lines I'm most proud of is Dr. Watson replies that I can't imagine being in that kind of a circumstance myself, but I think it's probably of little harm, you know, if you let your readers believe that these are actually two real characters. So it's a fascinating. I really loved writing that line. I hope you enjoy reading as much as I enjoy writing it and recalling it.
We had a couple of questions that were similar, one from Joanne and one from Kent, that talk about, they ask about your experiences as a detective, as a person in law enforcement, and how has that impacted your writing, especially this book, and have you used any of your experiences in your books?
Yeah, very good questions. And as you may remember, Brian mentioned in the bio that I used to teach when I was a police officer with the Colorado Springs Police Department in the Police Academy. And what I would use is quotes from Sherlock Holmes to emphasize some of the fundamentals of investigations. And those were based upon personal experience as a homicide detective. And I always used extensive visualization, the crime scene photos and autopsy photos to get kind of that fundamental across. But that quote was really helpful to weave into the theory and then getting published. And I think that's the one thing that the writing does, is it forces you to get your words down into a manageable form, those thoughts. And then I had the privilege of being able to deliver that paper on these Sherlockian theories at a international conference in Montreal about 25 years ago. And there were 400 people in attendance. It was translated in 3 different languages and was kind of a capstone of my investigative career at that time. But what it did do is it made you kind of, really do some soul searching. Is this quote as beneficial as I think it is? Is it worth passing on? And then if you receive validation from other criminalists and investigators who say, that's spot on, John. That quote, that comment, I've used that many times, or I've learned from that, and it makes it much more memorable. It's something that you can hang on to. So yes, that's probably a clumsy way to answer your question, but I guess the answer is yes. I've used many of these, and I think there's tremendous value in the objectivity and underscoring the importance of the different quotes and why they were beneficial 125 years ago, why they're beneficial today for investigators.
And I'm looking at the time. Unfortunately, we're closing in on the 7 o'clock hour. There are several more questions and comments in here, and I'd like to let all of you know that we will make sure John sees all of them. Many compliments to you, and some other questions about your writing techniques, and we'll make sure you get them. Susan commented, though, and this would be good for everyone in attendance to know, that right now, because of COVID restrictions, the tours at Glen Eyrie are on pause. But when things open back up, she says they would love to host all of us for a tour there. And they are still taking reservations for overnight stays in the meantime. So if you really get into the atmosphere of the book, definitely something to look forward to. And our guest, John Wesley Anderson, Sherlock Holmes in Little London, 1896, the missing year. Make sure to pick up a copy and read it. Any closing thoughts?
Well, Susan, I'm so glad that you're here. And if you really want to treat, take Susan up on the offer and go to high tea or spend a night or a weekend at Glen Eyrie Castle, but request the Dr. Watts room, because the fireplace in Dr. Watts's room is the one that's got the tiles, and that's where the hidden vault is, the panel, and it's fictitious, so don't try to find it, but you'll be able to see that fireplace, and that was an important setting. And Susan, thank you for letting everybody know that they'll be welcome to come once COVID restrictions are lifted. And thank you again, Brian and Shannon and PPLD for hosting this event and for everybody joining in. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Well, it's been an honor. Thank you for being here, John. And we'd like to remind everyone as well that this session is being recorded. So as soon as we get a little bit of editing done, give us a couple of days and we'll forward a copy to John. It'll be available through him or on the Pikes Peak Library District YouTube website. John Anderson, thank you for being here, and for all of our guests and attendees, thank you for being here as well. Everyone have a wonderful holiday season and a good night.